Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about William Shakespeare's play Henry IV, Part 1. So this is definitely the more famous of the two parts of Henry IV. This is a history play. And so like many history plays, it has characters that have the exact same names. This is one thing that I find very interesting about Shakespearean history plays across the board is you tend to have the same names cropping up over and over and over again in these different plays. In large part because we're dealing with nobility, and the nobility are named for the titles of their lands, and their lands remain the same in England. So you get a bunch of different Northumberlands, you get a bunch of different Gloucesters. There isn't a Gloucester in Henry IV, but you get a bunch of different Gloucesters. You get a bunch of different Kents. You get a bunch of different Yorks, all of these different people. But Henry IV Part 1 takes this convention of using the same names to a comic extreme. In that, the play really centers on a triad of Henrys. 3 Henrys. King Henry IV, who is, of course, the king in this play, formerly Henry Bolingbroke, who defeats Richard II, topples Richard II, and becomes King Henry IV. Then you have Prince Henry of Wales, also known as Henry or Harry Monmouth, also and primarily in this play called Prince Hal. He is the Prince of Wales, the successor to Henry IV, the future King Henry V. And then you have Sir Henry Percy, aka Harry Percy, aka most commonly known as Hotspur. The play really kind of centers around the tension between these 3 characters. So Henry IV, I'm just going to refer to as Henry from here on out for clarity. Hal, I'll call Hal. Hotspur, I'll call Hotspur. Great. So Henry is a big fan of Hotspur, Northumberland's son, because Hotspur is good at winning battles. He is out there doing the fighting, slaughtering some Scots and whatnot, right? We open with a scene in which there's discussion of how Hotspur has defeated Douglas, this Scottish rebel against Henry's reign, and how Hotspur was incredibly gallant on the battlefield. He took all these prisoners, etc., etc. Hal, by contrast, is not exactly acquitting himself in a princely fashion. He is hanging out in taverns, drinking and wenching and doing whatever manner of early modern debauchery people did. And he is engaged in sort of petty theft, footpad robbery, primarily with a guy, an aging, overweight knight named Sir John Falstaff, who's really the comic figure of this play. And we'll talk more about Falstaff. So Henry is not real thrilled that Hal is doing all this stuff that is bringing him into disrepute, while right there is Hotspur doing all of this stuff that everybody's like, yeah, that guy's fucking awesome. And so we get this speech from Henry in the opening scene, in the opening scene. He says, well, so Westmoreland, another noble with a geographic name, says of Hotspur's victory over Douglas, "In faith it is a conquest for a prince to boast of." And the king says, "Yea, there thou makest me sad, and makest me sin and envy that my lord Northumberland should be the father of so blessed a son. a son who is the theme of honor's tongue, amongst a grove the straightest plant, who is sweet fortune's minion and her pride, whilst I, by looking on the praise of him, see riot and dishonor stain the brow of my young Harry. Oh, that it could be proved that some night-tripping fairy had exchanged in cradle clothes our children where they lay, and called mine Percy, his Plantagenet. Then would I have his Harry and he mine. So this is really kind of the central conflict of the play on a sort of thematic level, because much of this play is about Hal's redemption arc. So Hal, as we find out fairly quickly, actually in the next scene, Act 1, Scene 2, we find out that Hal has this plan. He has an idea. He's got a scheme. He basically is pretending to be this sort of riotous, dissolute youth. But actually, his goal is to create foils for himself, right? So a foil, basically this idea comes from jewelry making, where you would set a stone against a piece of cheap but shiny metal, and so the light would reflect back through the stone, making it look more dazzling. This is also a literary trope, right? A foil in literature or creative writing involves giving two characters contrasting characteristics so that they highlight the difference between them. Hal is kind of hoping that Hotspur keeps having these sort of glorious martial victories and gaining this repute, because Hal knows that at some point, somehow, he's going to topple Hotspur, and he is going to gain that glory. Hal is also doubling up on the foil, because his plan is for his current behavior to contrast with his eventual kingliness. So he says here in soliloquy, and so we know we can trust this. I know you all and will a while uphold the unyoked humour of your idleness, yet herein will I imitate the sun, who doth permit the base contagious clouds to smother up his beauty from the world, that, when he pleases again to be himself, being wanted, he may be more wondered at, by breaking through the foul and ugly mists of vapours that did seem to strangle him. If all the year were playing holidays, to sport would be as tedious as to work. But when they seldom come, they wished for come, and nothing pleaseth but rare accidents. So, when this loose behaviour I throw off, and pay the debt I never promised, by how much better than my word I am, by so much shall I falsify men's hopes, and, like bright metal on a sullen ground, my reformation glittering o'er my fault shall show more goodly and attract more eyes than that which hath no foil to set it off. I'll so offend to make offence a skill, redeeming time when men think least I will. It's a brilliant speech, and it's a really good plan, actually, right? So one of the things that this play is very much invested in is Machiavellianism. And I will talk more about that, but I want to keep for the moment on this triad focus of the three Henrys, right? So Hal knows that his father is displeased with his behavior. And as soon as Hotspur has this tragic flaw, right? The source of his strength is his martial virtue, his willingness to do battle with anyone, anywhere, under any circumstances. That is also his main flaw. He's hot-headed and he is unable to control his temper. And so he ends up leading a rebellion against King Henry over what I perceive to be a fairly minor slight. I don't know that I mean, obviously Hotspur doesn't perceive it to be a minor slight, but I don't have a good sense of how sort of objectively problematic it is. Basically, Henry refuses to ransom Mortimer, who has been captured in Wales by Owen Glendower, who is a Welsh member who was sort of the last Welsh Prince of Wales, is what he's often called. He was a Welsh nobleman or aristocrat or member of the Welsh royal family or whatever it is. I can't remember exactly at the moment. And he led a Welsh rebellion against Henry IV. Mortimer was captured. That's Hotspur's uncle. Hotspur wants Mortimer ransomed, and the king is basically like, yeah, no, I'm not doing that. I'm not paying for that guy. He got himself captured by Owen Glendower. Why would I ransom him? Also, Hotspur, give me all your prisoners from the Scottish Wars so that I can ransom them or do what I want with them. And Hotspur is basically like, oh, it's on now, son. You crossed the line. Bring in the whirlwind. And so Hotspur, along with Northumberland, his father, and a bunch of other people, get up a rebellion. They contact Douglas, the guy that Hotspur had literally just defeated in Scotland. And Douglas is basically like, yeah, fuck yeah, I'll join you. I'll fight Henry. They contact Owen Glendower, who agrees to release Mortimer and join forces with them. And so they raise this big rebellion, a tri-country rebellion, if you want. England, Scotland, and Wales against Henry. Hal seizes his opportunity, and he's basically like, yeah, let me fucking fight Hotspur. I'll ruin him. I will fucking destroy him. And that is in fact what ends up happening. Partially because Hotspur is so hot-headed that he is unwilling to listen to good counsel. So much later in the play, let me see if I can find this immediately. So Hotspur is counseled by Vernon, who's another lord who's in their group. Basically, Vernon is like, listen, Owen Glendower has not been able to get his forces here. He says here to Hotspur and Douglas, Come, it may not be. I wonder much, being men of such great leadings as you are, that you foresee not what impediments drag back our expedition. Certain horse of my cousin Vernon's are not yet come up. Not sure why Vernon is also Vernon and his cousin Vernon, but you know what, whatever. Are not yet come up. Your uncle Worcester's horse came but today, and now their pride and mettle is asleep, their courage with hard labor tame and dull, that not a horse is half the half of himself. So basically he's like, yeah, half our forces are exhausted. Many of them aren't here. We're not ready to win this battle. And Hotspur is basically like, yeah, but they're tired too. So I don't even give a fuck about any reasons why we should maybe wait. We're going to fight now. And Douglas, who feeds into Hotspur's worst impulses, is basically like, hell yeah, the only reason anybody would suggest that we would wait at all is because they're a fucking coward. And Vernon's like, no, son, I will fight you right now if I have to. So anyway, Hotspur and Douglas make this terrible battle plan. They end up losing because they have no strategic thought. And Hal kills Hotspur in personal combat, thus redeeming himself in the eyes of Henry, his father, and of the world in general. Henry is a Machiavellian. He's a Machiavellian in Richard II, which is the play in which he ascends to the throne. And he is Machiavellian in Henry IV, Part 1. But Hal is more so, right? So Hal's whole foil plan, his whole, I want to make myself look bad now so that when I look better, so that when I look good later, I look better than I otherwise would if I'd always looked good. He plays every angle really successfully. Hal, before the battle, praises Hotspur and offers single combat in place of a whole battle where a bunch of people would die. So he sets himself up as this person ready to take on his individual shoulders the burden of kingly responsibility. He says here, and he does this in a very chivalrous fashion, right? He says here, in both your armies there's many a soul shall pay full dearly for this encounter, if once they join in trial. Tell your nephew, that's Hotspur, the Prince of Wales doth join with all the world in praise of Henry Percy. By my hopes this present enterprise set off his head. I do not think a braver gentleman, more active valiant, or more valiant young, more daring or more bold is now alive, to grace this latter age with noble deeds. For my part, I may speak it to my shame, I have a truant been to chivalry, and so I hear he doth account me too. Yet this before my father's majesty, I am content that he shall take the odds of his great name and estimation, and will, to save the blood on either side, try fortune with him in a single fight. Hal points out that he is saying this in front of his father to regain his father's estimation. He praises Hotspur, praises Henry Percy, a chivalric gesture. He acknowledges his own shortcomings. There's a mea culpa here. And he says, I want to do what's right. I want to ensure that as few people die as possible. So let's make it single combat. It's a masterpiece of it's a masterpiece of Machiavellian chivalry, right? Whereas Hotspur has this sort of militarism, but he doesn't have any of that ruthless cunning for how to gain and achieve power. And so it's a really interesting play in that sense. The other character I want to talk about is Falstaff, Sir John Falstaff, one of the best comic characters in the history of theater. Falstaff is a buffoon in this play, but he's in many ways, he's a tragic buffoon. So much of Falstaff's whole persona is this sort of bonhomie, right? He frequents taverns. He likes wine, women, and song, wine especially. And he likes food. He eats excessively. He's involved in this band of petty criminals. But he also... And he consistently lies. He puffs himself up, right? He talks about his noble deeds. He continually sort of misrepresents himself to make himself look more admirable, etc., etc. And there is, on some level, and this might have been more significant for early modern audiences, there is a sense in which Falstaff leads Hal astray from the right path of noble, princely behavior. But of course, Hal almost starts the play, right? In Act 1, Scene 2, the first scene he's in, he almost starts the play by saying, I know what I'm doing, and what I'm doing is purposeful. I am specifically engaging with Falstaff and the other people in this tavern circle for my own ends. And so we can't necessarily blame Falstaff for that. But again, I think Falstaff is ultimately a kind of tragic figure, and that becomes more apparent in Henry IV Part 2. But even here, let me see if I can find this bit. Yeah, so we know that Hal is manipulating Falstaff, right? And we get But Falstaff is, on some level, genuinely a good guy, right? And that's a hard thing to say because he is a thief. He does actually rob people. But he's this sort of carnival-esque figure of obscene drunkenness and gluttony and sort of boasting and things like this. And he's a fun character, even though he has all these objectively bad characteristics. We get this sense that we get this I think very painful sense, maybe because I quite like Falstaff. I find it such a painful moment. We get this indication that Hal is going to destroy Falstaff, which he does in part 2. There's this bit where Falstaff and Hal are in this tavern, sort of performing this interview between Hal and his father. And initially, Falstaff is playing the king and Hal is playing himself. And Falstaff, in the guise of Henry IV, praises Falstaff. And Hal basically says, no, that's not what my father would say. We're going to switch roles. You play me, I'll play my father. And Hal uses that opportunity, playing the king, to heap this abuse on Falstaff, these continual insults and degradations on him. And finally, at the end of this scene, Falstaff says, no, my good lord, banish Pato, banish Bardolph, banish Poins. That's the other sort of 3 members of their gang. But for sweet Jack Falstaff, kind Jack Falstaff, true Jack Falstaff, valiant Jack Falstaff, and therefore more valiant, being as he is old Jack Falstaff, banish not him thy Harry's company. Banish not him thy Harry's company. Banish plump Jack and banish all the world. And I don't know. I feel that this is... He is playing as the prince here, but you feel that there's something very genuine here. That Falstaff genuinely likes Hal, and he genuinely does believe that they are friends, and he wants to be friends with Hal. And Hal's response is a very cold, I do, I will. There's this plea here from Falstaff, almost. I would say he breaks character in playing as Hal. Don't abandon our friendship when you become king. And Hal's response is, I do, I will. I find that heartbreaking.